All right, hello once again, Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. And you've heard it before, but on my unending quest to provide as much information as possible for students in both the AWD 1000 Web Development Technologies and AWD 1111 Database Driven Websites courses, I've been doing a series of video presentations that are based on the ebooks of Mr. Flavio Copes. And so far, I've done the whole ebook for Mr. Copes's HTML, and now I'm working on the one for CSS. And I'm working my way through here, and we're 129 pages in. And the next thing they talk about in here is tables. All right, so they give a basic table. We can put this in and get rid of the stuff that we've got in there. All right, so I'm going to come back into here. And I'm going to take all of the stuff that we put in here before and just comment it out, both in the HTML and in the CSS. So there, everything is commented out in the CSS there. And let's jump into the HTML and do the same. Looks like that'll work. I may not be perfect, but that's okay. That's fine. All right, so let's put in this table. Oops, that's not like that. Let's put in the table. And there it is. Now it's, to be fair, not a whole heck of a lot in there. All right, kind of table. But you've got your head, then there's the row, then there's your two headings, and the row, and the head section. There's our body. Again, we've got a row, and we've got another row, and in the body, and in the table. Let me stop for the clock for a sec. All right, so with that in there, saving, here's our table. Not much to it. And you know, we can make it bigger, of course, but not much to it, and also not too much as far as the styling goes. Okay. All right. So it looks just like this. We can use CSS to style it. Let's start with a border. A nice border can go a long way. All right. So this is saying that around the table itself, we want a border. Around each of the headings, we want a border. And around each of the pieces of data, we want a border. That border will be a single pixel, solid, kind of a darker gray in color, I believe. So let's put that in. And there it is. And you see how it's changed our table. All right. All right. One common thing with tables is the ability to add color to one row and a different color to another row. This is typically known as zebra striping. You know, like with the zebra, you know, with, going back and forth between black and white. It's the same kind of an idea. So here what we're doing is we're telling it that every other one, we want to give it a different background color inside of the body. And if we did this right, it should now look like this. So let's take a look. Let's put it in and then rerun it and see if indeed that's what happened. There it is. Now you might say, well, wait a minute, that's odd. Yeah, 0, 1. And it's weird because some of the stuff that they do in here starts at 0 and some starts at 1. I didn't make the rules. I just got to play by them. Okay, all right. If you add a border collapse to the table element, all borders are collapsed into one. So to just the table itself, yeah, that looks a lot nicer. I wouldn't have picked purple, but when I write my own book, then I don't have to pick purple. Now they've got this SID in here too, and it doesn't look like it's in mine. So was that in the original? Did I just miss it? No, they don't have SID in there. That's okay. It doesn't really matter. You get the idea anyway, I believe. Centering things in CSS is a task, as it says, that is very different if you need to center horizontally or vertically. In this post, the author will explain the most common scenarios and how to solve them. If a new solution is provided by Flexbox, I ignore the old technique because we need to move forward. All right, so to center text horizontally. All right, now we're not talking tables anymore, but it says text is very simple to center horizontally using the text align property. Set to center. All right, so if we come in here and do this, in fact, let's just do it like this. Let's just keep doing what we've been doing, which means that we will put in this and this. And there's telling it to take our paragraphs, whoops, and center them horizontally. And let's add a couple paragraphs. So let's take this table, comment it out. And we'll put in a paragraph or two. So we got 5. This is a paragraph. This is another paragraph. Still another paragraph. And another paragraph. And the last paragraph, okay? And you can see how these are centered on the page. All right. The modern way to center anything that is not text is to use Flexbox. Notice that it's not text. What we just did was text. All right. So you can grab a section, do a display text, and say justify content center to put it right in the middle. All right. Here is the alternative approach if you don't want to use Flexbox. Anything that is not text can be centered by applying an automatic margin to the left and to the right. We've talked about this before. And setting the width of the element. All right. We've already talked about this, but saying margin 0 auto is the same as saying margin top 0, margin bottom 0, margin left auto, and margin right auto. When auto, that basically is saying to center them, to try to keep them automatically the same size on each. Remember to set the item to display block if it is inline. So that's for centering horizontally. All right. Centering vertically, as it says, this has always been a more difficult task. Flexbox now provides a great way to do this in the simplest way possible. All right. Now look before for the Flexbox. For the solution for Flexbox, we had this. My section display flex justify content center. My section display flex align item center. So the only difference is justify content center when we were aligning horizontally, and align items center if we are centering vertically. All right. If you want to do both, centering vertically and centering horizontally, as mentioned right here, you just add them both. All right. So align item center, justify content center. There it is, smack dab in the middle. The same can be done using grid. Notice it's place items, and you're telling it to use the entire view height. All right, we're at 10 minutes here, so we're doing fine. And next is lists. And as it says, lists are a very important part of many web pages. You can style them in a lot of ways. Now, one thing that gets mentioned here is the list style type. So setting that to a square is instead of the round thing, which is actually called a disk. All right, it'll be a square. There's also circle that you can use, but that is a circle that is not filled in. And if you don't want to do that, you can provide a URL with your own image in it if you so desire. Again, list style image is used for, they call it a custom marker. All right. The position element lets you add a marker outside the default or inside of the list. So there's a lot of different ways that you can, for lack of better words, pretty it up. All right. Now, they're talking media queries, and it's interesting because they say in this section we're going to introduce media types in media features. Then we'll explain media queries. They've already discussed media queries a little bit, but regardless, the idea behind this entire thing is that what you want, what you are actually trying to do, is you are trying to make sure that regardless of the medium that you're using to look at the web page, that it looks right in that medium. So in other words, it's going to look different in or on a cell phone as opposed to on a laptop or a desktop, and it'll probably look different still if you have it on a tablet. All right. So used in media queries and import declarations, media types allow us to determine on which media a CSS file or piece of CSS will be loaded. The default is all, which means loaded on everything. Oh, it is screen. I thought it was all. Maybe again, I guess I'm wrong. I apologize. So screen is the default. So when it's presented on the screen, all means for everything, printing and screen and speech. It says in the past there were more of them, but most have been deprecated over time. You can use import statements as are shown right there, and you can load CSS files on multiple media types, separating each one with a comma if you want to do it that way. The same kind of thing will work. This is the way that most of the time you'll probably see it done, and that is, again, by using the link tag. All right. And as they mention right there, the author says, we are not limited to just using media types. In the media attribute, there's more. So the feature descriptors says these represent additional keywords that can be used to add to the media attribute of the link or the import declaration. So there's a lot of things that are in there. And now it says each of them have a corresponding min and max. Well, many of them do. I don't know if like color has a min and max, but okay. Now, if you look at this one says to import this, but the max width has to be 800. So again, it's the kind of thing where you have to be thinking, all right? And not only that, when you're working with this stuff, let's see, how about this? CSS breakpoint values. I think that's the right one. There you go. So let's grab this. I'm going to just grab this whole thing in here. Oh, we'll use this one. That's fine. So it says most phones are going to have that size resolution. So usually you won't encounter anything that is less than 320 pixels. But if you say max width 480, that'll cover everything from 1 to 480. All right. Then if you say max or min width of 481 and max width of 768, that should cover all of your iPads and tablets. Then if you say min width of 769 and a max width of 1024, that, as it says, should handle small screens and laptops. 1025 to 1200 should handle desktops, and above 1201 should be, TVs and whatever. And again, this is another time where typically, it seems at least, you end up using pixels, PX, as opposed to using rems. Rems will work though. I've done it both ways, and they will work. So again, you can combine these logical operators, so you can use anding and oring, etc. I'd recommend, if you're going to do that, to use parentheses, even if they're not required, just to make sure that things are set up in the way that you want them to set up. All right. So there's an example there at media screen with a max width of 800 pixels, and you'd put in your CSS. Again, usually when people are writing CSS and they're doing media queries, they'll do it one of two ways. They'll either write their own files with media queries in them. All right, so a separate media query file or files, or at best, at least rather, they'll put them on the end, because usually it goes at the end of the actual CSS if they're going to be in a regular CSS file. All right. Feature queries, as it says, are a recent and relatively unknown ability of CSS, but a supported one. We can use it to check if a feature is supported by a browser using the supports keyword. Kind of nice, because if you're telling it that you want it to provide something, it, as always, would be a good idea if you knew that the system actually did support it then. All right. Filters, as mentioned, allow one to perform operations on elements. So some of the stuff that's in here, it says, notice the parentheses after each option because they each require a parameter. So in other words, these are methods, all right? Functions, whatever you want to call them. All right, so blur, and it's what you want to blur, etc. So here's a filter. You're putting in opacity, but what percentage opacity do you want? So 50% in this case. You can combine things. All right. So next they're going to talk about each one in detail, and I'm going to try to not rush, bad wordage, but run through this quickly. Blurs, as it says, are an element content. All right, so as we look through this, okay, it says blurs an element content. And what blur is, again, typically it comes from the fact that if you go from one element to another, the element you are coming from has a blur event that fires. The element that you're going to is going to have a focus event that's going to fire. Opacity we've already talked about, between 0 and 1. All right, 0 is totally transparent. 100% means totally visible, or typically it's referred to as opaque. Drop shadow, as it says, shows a shadow behind the element. And again, you don't have to do that ever, but a lot of times people do, just because it looks a little nicer, it looks a little bit more professional. Grayscale, make the element have a gray color. Sepia, I think that's the way it's pronounced, to make the element have that color. Invert, inverts the colors of an element. All right, it says, means looking up the opposite of a color in the HSL color wheel. So you can get some very different looking stuff when you do that. Hue rotate, the HSL, remember that's hue, saturation, and light color wheel, is represented in degrees. Using hue rotate, you can rotate the color using positive or negative rotations. Brightness, to alter the brightness of an element. Contrast, to alter the contrast of an element. Saturate, to alter the saturation of an element. URL, as it says, to apply a filter defined in an SVG or scalar vector graphic file. And this is a good place to stop, and we'll pick it up in the next video then, talking about transforms.